All right, welcome back to another episode of the Paycheck to Daycheck Reselling Podcast. Today is episode number 13, and we want to talk about reasons why people fail at reselling. And there's a lot of people that watch lots of different videos, and a lot of people have different opinions of why people fail, but there are a lot of reasons why people are interested in reselling. They start, and then a few months later, they stop. This podcast episode will go through many reasons why people fail at reselling. So let's start with the first thing, which I think is really important. People have unrealistic expectations about reselling. If you look at, some of the ads that you get targeted by on Facebook or just social media in general, or you're looking at people and got this aura that reselling is so easy and anyone can do it and you can just start and make all this money. They don't paint the right picture, in my opinion. What do you feel about that, Ashley?
Yeah, they don't paint an accurate picture. They're basically selling like rainbows and unicorns when it's not that. There are good and bad things about every single business, every single job, every single company, etc. There are things that are going to be, positive and negative. So to just hit on the positives, that's just, like you said, unrealistic. And it gives people that might be interested in starting a reselling business an unrealistic expectation of like what they might be getting into.
Yeah. And a lot of times you'll see, oh, well, I'm sitting on this beach and, I have my phone and I can work from anywhere, or I just took this vacation for the weekend. Yeah, you have that flexibility, but that's not reality. I mean, you had to take time off, which means you're not going out and sourcing, you're not listing items, you're not shipping items. And when you take time off, you definitely see a difference in your sales. Now with Amazon FBA, yes, you can still get sales because everything's in the Amazon warehouse. The picture that people paint with, oh, you only have to spend 5 hours a week on Amazon and make all this money. I just don't think that that's being realistic. And it's not. And I think a lot of those people are the ones that are trying to sell you a course or a group or something to persuade you that Amazon is a good business model for anyone. If you want to have all the time in the world to go on vacation or be with your family, which is true, but it takes a lot of time to get to that point. It's unrealistic to think that reselling is something that you can start right away, make all this money, and have all that time freedom.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to move on to the next reason that we think people fail at reselling, and that is they aren't finding the right items to sell. So they're making bad purchases. They don't really understand how to find profitable items, and maybe they don't have a sourcing criteria in place at all. So what that means basically is you want to know how much capital you have to spend on inventory. And then, so what that means is that you need to know how much capital you have to spend on inventory. And then, okay, so what that means is maybe you don't understand how much money you have available to purchase items, or you're purchasing too many items or too few items, or like I mentioned before, the wrong items. So you need to know what sell-through rate is. You need to know how to look up sold comps. There's a lot that goes into this. And that's pretty much for every single platform. Amazon is very, very data driven. There's Keepa, there's all kinds of things that you have at your disposal to make sure that you're making the right purchases. And it's not just these willy-nilly, like I'm going on a gut feeling kind of thing. You want to use the numbers and the data that's available to you for every platform to make educated buying decisions.
So the sourcing criteria also is related to buying criteria. So you need to know, like, you might not be able to go out and buy $50 items. Your buying criteria might be, you know what, I can only find products that are under $25 and that are going to sell within 30 days. They're going to have a low cost to ship, and the profit is going to be XYZ. So if you don't have that in place, or you don't have sourcing criteria in place, you're just going out and just blind buying. And like Ashley said, you have to pay attention to software like Keepa that's going to help you make a good buying decision. The data is there for Amazon. It will tell you the sales rank. So that tells you how often that item sells per day, how many sellers are on it, what the prices have been. It gives you all that data. But if you don't understand those tools, you're going to go out and you're just going to be blind buying items. And then in turn, they're not going to sell. Another thing to add, a lot of times people follow other resellers online and see that they're buying this particular product, and they go out and they just start buying that item without doing their own research. And I feel like that can get you into a really bad place. If you see someone that maybe goes to Walmart and buys this particular toy and they're showing it on their social media, and you're like, oh, I've seen that toy at Walmart, and you go in and you buy them out of that toy, and then all of a sudden, guess what has probably most likely happened? You didn't do your research. That toy was actually not a really good buy. Just because you see it doesn't mean that it's going to sell, or just because somebody shares that it sells doesn't mean it truly is, unless you do the background research. Maybe other people went out there because they saw that particular person on social media posting about it, and now guess what? Instead of 5 sellers, there are 50 sellers, and you bought all that inventory and you're going to sit on it. So that's definitely something to think about when you're going out and buying something. Try to do your research. You will have bad buys. It's just the name of the game, but you can lessen that if you're doing your research upfront.
Yeah. And here's a quick hot tip for you guys on people that post purchases like that on social media, what Liz was referring to a minute ago. A lot of people that post these items that they're so excited, they bought 50 of them, whatever, they sold for such and such a profit. They're posting this after the fact. So a lot of people are not going to give up their hot BOLO items while they're hot and while they're a BOLO. They're going to post it like 6 months later or 2 months later, when like the thrill of it has died down, when it's not as profitable, and they don't care if 50 other people jump on the listing now. They've already made their money, and now they're passing on quote unquote valuable information to you guys, but it's really going to hurt your pockets in the long run.
All right. So another thing of why people fail at reselling is they don't treat it like a business. They treat it as more of a hobby, side hustle. And we all know now that the IRS is changing how they look at reselling. So before, you could make, what was it, $20,000 in sales and not have to account for that on your taxes. Well, guess what? Now, if you do over $600 on a platform, you need to account for that on your taxes. A lot of people don't realize that when they first start reselling, because it is so easy. Anyone can resell. You don't need a business license. You don't need an LLC. You can use your social security number, put it in your account. Like on eBay, they'll ask for that. They'll ask for your address, phone number, email, your bank account to make deposits. And really anyone can resell. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize is, from the start, it needs to be treated like a business. You need to be accounting for your inventory, for your sales, for your shipping, for your returns, your expenses, writing down your mileage. There are so many different things that you need to be tracking. And I think that's where people get frustrated, because then down the line, they don't realize, oh, I should have been putting money aside for taxes. And they don't realize that, because you just see all the stuff on the internet, how easy it is to resell, and you don't see the back end stuff that us resellers actually have to do. That is pretty time consuming.
Yeah. And I'll refer back to this again, they've received bad advice from another reseller or someone online that is inaccurate in regards to their business. So if you want to make sure that you're doing things the right way, you need to find a CPA in your state and ask them some questions. Find someone that you like, that is easy to work with, and come up with a plan for your business.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I would not ask another reseller for advice, because they are not the experts. Each state is different. You're going to need software or some sort of spreadsheet to track items. And we actually, on our Gumroad for Paycheck to Daycheck, the reselling podcast, we actually do have a spreadsheet that's just a guide for you when you first start reselling that you can use to track things. And Ashley made it a good thing to start when you are first reselling, because it's going to have a spot where you can track your inventory, your sales, your expenses. And really, if you're going to start with it right away so you aren't 6 months down the road and then you realize I didn't track a thing. And then you're spending hours and hours and hours having to go back through, track down expenses, receipts, try to download your sales.
The next reason that we have here is that people lack patience and they tend to give up pretty easily. So Chris from Clear the Shelf podcast on Twitter said that people tend to give up because it's harder than what they were sold on. So again, they're sold on this dream of rainbows and unicorns, and you're going to make so much money and it's going to happen overnight. And it's just really not like that. So again, they might be listening to the wrong people. We always say that it's not necessarily easy. The reselling business isn't easy. It's simple, but it's definitely not easy. It's tough sometimes. So if you don't have the patience to work through issues that might arise or problem solve.
Patience to start seeing sales come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And patience for your business to grow. You can't give up if after 30 days, you're not making $10,000 a month. Like, could some people do that? Yeah, sure. But the people that you idolize, that you see on social media, they didn't get there overnight, and they had the patience to work their business over and over and over every single day, even when it got really hard and they had problems come up and issues arise, they stuck with it. And that's how you become successful.
So yeah, for an example would be if you sold on Amazon, you might get frustrated and not have patience after a month, because a lot of people don't realize when you first start selling on Amazon, you don't get your payouts right away. They actually hold back money in your account for returns, disputes, things like that. So just because you start seeing sales on Amazon, and let's say you did $5,000 that month in sales, you might not see that $5,000 right away because they're going to hold back money. And so that's one thing that people don't mention when they're talking about when you first start selling on Amazon. So that's just one thing to think about. And a lot of people, once they find that out, they get so mad. Like, I see posts on social media of people, Amazon has my money. Well, they're going to give it to you. It's just they hold it back for good reason, because they know that, there are some scam accounts where they'll go in and, they'll do things against terms of service. And that's why Amazon ends up keeping that money, because they don't release it until your account is in good standing and they have enough funds to be able to return money if people return items. So that's just one thing to think about. It's a marathon and it's not a sprint. Okay, here is a good one of why people fail. Some people just are not meant to own and run their own business. They're not meant to be self-employed.
Amen.
And what drives me nuts is people who talk negative about a 9-to-5 job. There's nothing wrong with working a 9-to-5 job. If that is what makes you happy and you like that, do it. People start reselling because they don't want to work for somebody else. They want to work for themselves, and they can't do it. They don't have the discipline to work for themselves. So when you're working for yourself and you're self-employed, you are the one that has to do everything. You don't have a boss telling you, okay, at 10 a.m., I need you to complete this assignment. As a teacher, my day was planned out for me. Every single day usually was pretty much the same. I'd go in, I'd go to the playground, I'd greet all the kids, I'd have them line up outside the door. They'd shake my hand, say, "Good morning, Mrs. Kellogg." We would walk in the classroom. We'd have our circle time, things like that. It was routine. And some people like that. They like to have routine. There's sometimes where I'm like, what was I just doing? I was just doing a task. And then Casey's like, "Oh, did you check Skype? Because Chad needs something for Amazon." And I'm like, okay, I'll get that done. And then after, I'm like, what was I doing? I totally forgot. You are the one that has to do it all. So you really have to be organized, and it's just not right for everyone. And that's okay.
Absolutely. It's totally okay. The next reason came from kind of a collection of answers that we got on Twitter. And basically what the gist of it is that people don't diversify or change up their reselling business, or they're not willing to. You can get burnout when you're only using like one method of sourcing or not trying different things with listing and shipping. If one thing isn't working out for you, then try to change it and see if something else might work for you. So I just cannot sit around and like list all day. Like my brain will not allow that to happen. So I work in like power hours. So I'll sit down, I have everything ready at the table, no distractions. I'm just ready to list. All my photos are done. They're edited. I'm ready to rock and roll. And I'll just set my timer for an hour and I just do that for an hour. I will list for an hour. Same thing with photographing. I'll do a power hour photographing hour and just focus on that for 1 hour. You just need to find the things that work for you. And if something isn't working, like we said, diversify, change. It's okay. For example, online arbitrage might not be working for you. You just might not like it. A lot of people love it. They love the fact they don't have to leave their house. They can just like click around on their computer or on their phone and stuff shows up at their door. And that's really cool, especially the last couple of years when it was really hard to, be out in public and things were shutting down and whatnot. It was a really good option to have online arbitrage at our disposal, but it might not be what is super enjoyable for people. I love going out and sourcing retail arbitrage. I love going to Target, Walgreens, CVS, whatever, and finding it's like a treasure hunt to me. And I get this like really big thrill out of it. And I didn't realize that I loved doing that until a few years ago. I was so set in my ways with thrifting, and I love thrifting too, but I hate listing clothing. I've talked about this before. I just despise it. It was really good money and I was doing well at it, but I just wasn't finding joy in it anymore. It wasn't making me happy. And then when I realized I could go to Target, I was already going to Target way too much. I could find stuff there at the same time. It like paid for my trip. I made extra money. I mean, that was just mind blowing to me. It was a total game changer and it really reignited my love for reselling.
And that's the best thing about reselling is there's all these ways to do it. But if you stick with one way, that is a fast track to burnout. So definitely don't be afraid to change it up. If you're not enjoying it, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't resell. It's just try to find what works for you. Okay, here is one thing that when people first start reselling, and it kind of piggybacks up on bad buys, but just because you buy an item doesn't mean it's going to sell right away. So I think a lot of people they're in the honeymoon stage of reselling and they're really excited and they understand the process and they go out and they just start buying all this inventory, and then they look and they're seeing a spare bedroom filled with inventory and they're like, nothing is selling. So I think you shouldn't have the expectation that everything is going to sell right away, because that's not how reselling works. So make sure that you are doing your research and know that there's going to be some items that you buy that will sell right away, and there's going to be items that you buy that might be a long-term hold. Legos are like that. A lot of people buy Legos and they buy them with the expectation that they're not going to sell right away. They're going to hold them until the Lego set retires and then the value goes up. So a lot of people start buying things and get so frustrated when the item doesn't sell right away, and they just don't have the patience to wait it out.
All right. So the next thing that we're going to talk about, there's kind of two things here that I wanted to mention. So the first thing is that a lot of resellers don't know their numbers. If you ask them and if they're willing to tell you, they just probably don't have the answers to all of these questions. The things you need to know include how much you're spending on items to resell, how much they're selling for, the profit that you're making, minus fees, minus shipping. Different platforms have different fees, so you need to be aware of those. You need to know if you're paying for help, what that cost is, if you have storage, a warehouse, if you have a storage unit, if you are paying for different services or sharing software or Keepa, things like that. And then, like Liz mentioned before, are you putting money aside for taxes? That's like super important. And then the other side to this is they don't reinvest profits to grow. So maybe they're taking all the profit and then going, on vacation or out to dinner or whatever. Like your business is not sustainable if you don't reinvest some of that profit. in order to grow your business. Like you have to keep buying inventory. It's a never ending cycle. You have to buy more to make more. You need that capital. So yeah, too many people just take their profits and they don't reinvest them back into their business, and that will kill it before it's even gotten good.
And to add to that, that's why Casey didn't leave his W-2 for so long. I think it was 3, almost 4 years. He still worked, so we could afford our mortgage, bills, but also any of the money that we were making reselling, we were reinvesting in the business. And that's definitely true for Amazon with our private label business. Any profits we took and we bought more inventory. And we didn't take an owner disbursement or any money from those accounts for a solid 2 years. And that's actually, I follow a guy named John on Twitter. I know I mentioned him on the podcast before, but that was his advice as well, especially if you're going to do private label, is don't have the expectation that you are going to be able to take money from the business. I mean, you can take some, like if your goal was to get to where maybe it helped you pay a car payment. We're talking, a lot of profit. People take it and then they look and they don't have the money then to buy more items. And that's how a reselling business works. You buy inventory, it sells, you buy more inventory. You have to do that until you get to that point where it makes sense, where you can take out money that you need and still have money to reinvest. And it is so important to know your numbers. I know Casey and I didn't do the best when we first started reselling. We do use My Reseller Genie. We also have Easy Auctions Tracker just because we purchased that at the beginning of the year before we did My Reseller Genie. We use those to be able to know our numbers for eBay. That's so important when you're first starting to resell, is that you know your numbers, because in turn, that's going to help you grow. You'll be able to know, okay, well on eBay, these items are giving me the most profit. This way of sourcing is making me the most profit. And then in turn, it's only going to help you do better at what inventory you're finding. So definitely know your numbers, use some sort of software, even if it's just our inventory spreadsheet. Because there's certain items that you'll look at and you'll think, oh, I definitely profit a lot on those. And then once you factor in shipping, eBay fees, you're really not making as much money on that item. Nobody likes to deal with numbers. I don't, but it's something that you really need to look at, especially when you first start. It's just going to help you grow.
Okay, so the next reason we have for you guys is that people tend to look for direction in the wrong places. And we've touched on this a couple times already in this episode, but we're just going to really hammer it home now. We have basically been told what to do all of our lives by someone, whether that's our parents when we're little and growing up. They tell us what we can do, what we can't do. Then you go to school, your teachers tell you what to do. And then you go to college maybe, or you get into the workforce, and then you have professors and bosses telling you what to do. You're provided direction pretty much your entire life from the time that you were born. When you work for yourself, no one's telling you what to do unless you're taking direction from someone that you find like online or in the community. And there is just a ton of bad information out there. Not everyone in this community has the same integrity as you do. So you just really need to be careful who you're following and who you are taking advice from, because the wrong advice, the wrong direction could really derail your business.
Yeah, I would also take a step back. One, you want to find somebody you relate to or somebody you trust. Use your gut feeling. If you're talking to that person and they're more interested in selling you a product that they have, then I don't feel like they really have or your best interest. Definitely find someone who is going to genuinely help you. So, and you'll get that feeling. There's people that are they're out there just to make money on like affiliate commissions, and their information, they're really just selling the product. Like they probably like the courses that you see, like the Amazon courses. I mean, the one that we took in 2017, they're still trying to push that course. That person is not even selling on Amazon anymore. Like I highly doubt it. They're on to software. They're on to bigger, better things. Like they don't know the up-to-date things about Amazon. Amazon changes all the time. The fees change, what brands you can sell. And really, there's people that will not have your best interest out there in the reselling community. But then on the other hand, there are people who are very genuine and they have good information and they really are there to help other people be successful.
Absolutely.
Like
So,
us.
yeah. Really, what we want to say is to make sure that you do your research when you are trying to find someone that you mesh well with and that you're going to take advice and direction from. And maybe that's, us, maybe that's somebody else. Ask around, ask other resellers who they follow, who they trust. Ask if they don't, if they don't have any opinions, ask them if they've heard of, the specific reseller that you're thinking about using as your mentor, basically. And if you don't know who to ask, you guys can ask us. We are happy to help you out in any way that we possibly can.
Next thing of why people end up failing at reselling, they just have no desire to resell. They start and they don't like it, and that's okay. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about with people not being good at being self-employed or not being motivated. And some people might try reselling and just not like it. And so that's why a lot of people, I wouldn't even call it failing. It's just, they just have no desire. They don't want to do it. And that's okay. If you start reselling, you don't like it, then try something else.
Yeah, it's really easy, I think, for a lot of people to get I'm going to say sucked in, but I don't really mean it that harshly. Sucked into something that they see other people doing. It seems like this great idea at the time. Maybe you can't sleep one night and you're scrolling on Instagram and you're like, oh, wow, reselling. I could do that. Anyone could do that. And then you try it and you're just like, wow, this really sucks. You don't have to stick with it if it's not for you. You know what I mean? And that's totally cool. Maybe try a different niche, but some people just don't want to do it, and that's totally fine. So one of the top reasons I think that I personally did not fail at reselling when 2020 hit and things got very real for me very fast. I was in the car business and everything just closed down, obviously, in March 2020. As we all know, the car business doesn't close for anything. And all of a sudden, we had nothing to do. So I doubled down on my reselling business, but I was in my tiny little apartment in the middle of nowhere. I have no family out here. Pretty much all I had were my reselling friends. That really got me through that crazy time. That's how I met Liz. I met some really good friends through this Discord group that Liz and I were both in, and it really made a huge difference in my business. She has taught me so much about reselling and different platforms and just opened my eyes to the amount of opportunity that's out there besides the typical 9 to 5, which I had at the time no desire to go back to. So reselling can be very lonely, especially when you're going through something like we did in the last few years. But when you meet other resellers, that can help you to stay motivated and disciplined and have an accountability partner. And you also learn from them. So they might have something that they know in their toolbox, Liz and this freaking Scotty peeler thing. I had no idea what the heck it was. If you've seen it in our last couple episodes and on Instagram, and oh my God, I didn't know what it was, but it is this life-changing tool. So I got myself a Scotty peeler, and I wouldn't have known about it if it wasn't for her telling me about it. So there just might be information out there that you don't have access to until you have access to the right community of people. So as much as we're saying, be careful the people that you surround yourself with and be careful who you trust and take advice from, there's a huge advantage to having the right people in your corner. And that can totally change your business and your life, honestly.
Yeah. And you don't have to just do online stuff with other resellers. You can try to find resellers on social media that are in your area. I'm actually in 2 weeks having coffee with my reseller friend, Melissa. She has a completely different reselling business. She does a lot of women's clothing, but she does Poshmark. She sometimes does sales on Instagram. And really, she's just a good person in general. Just, I can tell she's very genuine and she's there if I ever need help. But one thing, it's just nice to sit down and have coffee with somebody who knows about reselling and knows what you go through on a daily basis, just to talk about little things like dealing with customers, because that's another thing. And it's good to have somebody to bounce ideas off of, to share stories, to give advice, and just have that friendship there. So reselling can really connect you to some awesome people online, but also can lead to in-person relationships as well. It's time for another What's in Our Reseller Toolbox. In this segment, we share the latest tips and tools to help you build and grow your reselling business. Let's find out what tool we have for today. For today's Reseller Toolbox segment, we are going to talk about another Chrome extension. It was actually just brought to my attention. We mentioned earlier in this episode that Chris from Clear the Shelf, he has a podcast as well, but he also has a Chrome extension. I was on Twitter before the episode and saw it, and I was like, that would be perfect for the Reseller Toolbox. We have mentioned before different cashback sites. So when you're doing online arbitrage or even just personal shopping online, you can have these Chrome extensions installed. Let's say you go to Kohl's, it'll tell you if it has like Rakuten or Top Cashback. Will tell you, okay, well, you're shopping on Kohl's, and Kohl's has an offer where you're going to get 3% back of anything that you purchase. Well, he created a Chrome extension called Rev ROI, and it's kind of like an all-encompassing Chrome extension to where you install it, and then it kind of shows you all the different cashback services to make sure that you're maximizing your cashback. So that's just a really cool extension. Definitely give it a try. If it works, reach out to Chris from Clear the Shelf. Let him know that you heard about it on the P2D podcast. And just another tool that you can use when you're doing online arbitrage or shopping online for yourself.
All right, back to the episode. The next reason that we have why a lot of resellers tend to fail is that they refuse to change. So my mom and dad were totally guilty of this when they were resellers. They were really like stuck in their ways, and that's how they are sometimes about certain things. But back in the day, it was a lot harder to be a reseller. There weren't as many tools. And when these tools started coming up, it was hard for them to adapt and change to those tools. I mean, we're talking back in the day when you had the digital camera and then you had to plug it into the, home computer and upload the pictures. And, there were still checks and money orders involved. It was a wild time to be alive. But reselling changes all the time. Like just from that, when I was in middle school and high school, when they were resellers, I'm not going to age myself too much, but it wasn't that long ago. And so much has changed since then. You have to change parts of your business sometimes. As an example, you might have, a brand on Amazon that you're restricted in. So you might need to find a way around that. eBay raising their promoted listing fees. There were so many people in the reselling community that I saw posting about the promoted listing changes, losing their minds about it. Like first of all, we can't do anything about it. eBay is not going to change. Like they decided to raise the listing fees. That's what they're going to do. That's their prerogative. We need to adapt to that and change with it. Like, yeah, it sucks that they decided to raise the fees. It isn't the best for our business, but you need to adapt to it. Like you either have to adapt or not adapt and move on to something else. The refusal to change can really like stop you in your place and just like take the head right off the snake. Like there's nowhere else to go.
Well, and a lot of that goes to mindset. So a lot of people don't have the right mindset. They hear like this kind of stuff and then they refuse to change, but in their mind, they should be like, okay, what can I do to get around this? And instead their mindset is, oh no, this isn't going to help me. Now I'm not going to make money. And it's just having the wrong mindset that can really not make you successful as a reseller. You have to have a good, positive mindset. When that happened, I'm like, okay, well, that means that with the eBay raising their promoted listings to 1%, there were some people that were like, I'm not going to promote anymore. I'm like, you know what? They want us to do 2%. We're going to do 2% and let's move on. Like there's just stop complaining, stop worrying about things that you can't change, and have a positive mindset and change with the changes. That's really what it comes down to. And reselling is something, with teaching, I knew what to expect. The only thing that really changed was kids I had in the class, the parents, and sometimes the curriculum. But, 9 times out of 10 throughout the school year, not many changes. With reselling, there are a lot of changes. There's a lot of changes from the different platforms, and that's just something that you need to expect, but be open to changing based on the changes that are going on.
I'm going to give you guys a real life example of something that I lived through while working in the car business. So I worked for this one dealership, and about 6 months into my employment there, they started doing this crazy thing where they changed the pay plan about every 3 months. So every 3 months, we'd have this big meeting, everyone would get called in, and then you'd receive all this paperwork that you'd have to sign saying that you acknowledge your new pay plan. There were 2 different groups, basically 2 different trains of thought here. The first group would leave the meeting, and then they would go into the huddle, we called it, the huddle outside, just out of earshot of all the managers. And they would huddle up and they would just complain and complain. And it would ruin, at least at a minimum, the rest of their day. All they could think about, all they could talk about, they were consumed by this pay plan change. The rest of us would take it back to our desks or our offices, and we would study it. And we would say, okay, how can I work on this pay plan to my advantage? How can I maximize it to make the most amount of money possible in the next 3 months until they change it again? But we knew that there's nothing that we could do to change the pay plan. They're going to change it again anyways. So why get so married to it when it's just going to change again and again and again? Instead of worrying about it so much, take that as an opportunity to figure out how you can use it to your advantage. So with the eBay changes, it's not ideal, but how can you use that to your advantage?
So here's something that a lot of resellers do when they first start is they hold on to inventory way too long. They get attached to their inventory. It's like, well, I'm not going to sell this item because I bought it for this. Like, they have the wrong approach to having a surplus of inventory. So for example, we have a bunch of Ray Dunn items because that was a lead that we were given, Ray Dunn, and I despise Ray Dunn. Love it for myself, but I refuse to buy it again to resell. So this was back in 2020. TJ Maxx had a website sale and all this clearance, and it was one of the leads. And back then, you could profit on some of the items. Well, I didn't truly understand how online arbitrage worked. I went crazy with my buys. I bought a bunch of wedding gift sets that were Ray Dunn, a bunch of holiday coffee mugs. I even went into Marshall's and bought like all the Ray Dunn stuff that they had. It stopped selling, which this can happen. An item that you thought was going to sell no longer sells. Can't have the mindset, I'm going to wait it out. There's some inventory that it's just not going to sell. You just need to realize it. It was a bad buy. The inventory, you have too much. You're holding on to it too long. You need to just liquidate it and move on. And that was another thought with Amazon as well. So when you're buying items for Amazon and they have what's called inventory age. So if you are looking in your seller account and you have inventory that's approaching, 9 months to a year, stop holding on to it. You need to liquidate it. One, it's going to give you more capital. You're going to get some sort of capital back. 2, it's going to open up the chance of you finding better inventory to replace it. So a lot of times resellers aren't successful because they hold on to inventory way too long. They end up getting inventory fees, or they just, in the end, just can't sell it and they don't do anything but donate it. Like, there's ways that you can liquidate. There's ways that you can try to sell it locally. At least try to recoup your money instead of holding on to your inventory. Never get attached to it. And if it isn't selling after a while, move on. Okay, here's one reason why resellers fail. And it's not a very common reason. People start reselling. They get so excited. They start making money. Then all of a sudden they think they're experts. So they kind of stray away from reselling and they start their own reselling group, or they start selling courses. They move away from reselling, stop focusing on that, and start focusing on other things. And then when they're not successful, then they get frustrated because they stopped learning about reselling. A lot of people think just because they've been selling on Amazon for 3 months and they had $30,000 in sales, now they are credible. So they have the screenshot to show people, and now they can make money selling courses and coaching and all this stuff. Sure, if you're successful and you do that, that's great. You're taking away from reselling when you do that. People lose focus of reselling and try to venture off and make more money in other ways, such as like the coaching or groups.
That's not a terrible thing. If you're good at teaching, if you're good at coaching and mentoring, that's fine. Like maybe that is what your calling is. With something like reselling, I think it's really important that if you're going to teach other people how to do it, it's important that you are continuously doing it yourself, because there's so many changes that are coming up all the time. Fees change, like we said, the promoted listings on eBay, that has changed. Like you need to be aware of these changes and what's going on inside the community and inside of all of these platforms if you're going to accurately pass on this knowledge to other resellers.
And reselling is more long-term. Your course is going to get outdated. I don't know many people who have Amazon courses that are still selling on Amazon. So if you want reselling to be long-term and be something that you are building and building and building, try to focus on just reselling and don't stray away to other ways to make money and not focus on reselling. I guess that's my point.
All right. So the last reason that we have for you guys as to why resellers sometimes fail is that they give up too early and they get overwhelmed and they just want to quit. So some of the things that we find overwhelming and that we've found other resellers find overwhelming are things like death piles, taxes, bookkeeping, not knowing your numbers, and then being overwhelmed by that at the end of the day. All of those things can become too much. And if you let them go for too long, it's going to become totally overwhelming and frustrating. And a lot of people, instead of just doubling down and like figuring it out, they just throw in the towel instead. So this is why we highly advise, get a CPA, get your books in order. Don't let your death pile build up to an overwhelming amount. Another tip that I have for you guys is to figure out what your strengths are and double down on those. And instead of trying to fight through your weaknesses, get yourself to a point where you can hire out those weaknesses. So if bookkeeping is just really not your thing, that's me. You want to find someone that is really good at it, that you mesh well with, and that understands your business so they can keep your books for you. A great CPA. Maybe listing is just not your cup of tea. So you want to get yourself to the point where you can hire a lister. And as far as giving up too early, so many people, and this isn't just for reselling. A lot of people do this in business in general. They give up right before that breakthrough happens, right before everything clicks, the light bulb turns on, or when something goes wrong, the going gets tough. These are turning into motivational poster quotes, but when things go wrong or when they get tough, you have to just push through. The breakthrough happens right at the moment when you think you can't take enough. So don't give up, just keep pushing through.
Yeah, and to add on to that, another thing to always be doing that will help you not be so overwhelmed is always be learning. Always be learning the platform that you're selling on. How can you improve your business? Take time during the week to learn a few different things, such as, what is cross-listing? How could it benefit your business? Research different listing services that could help you and things like that. Never assume that you know it all, because there is so much to learn about reselling. So don't give up. You're going to feel overwhelmed, and take that as an opportunity to, whatever you're overwhelmed with. If you're overwhelmed with accounting, get a CPA. If you're overwhelmed with doing an FBA Amazon shipment and that's stressing you out because you don't know how to do it, watch videos, learn how to do it. Don't just give up and walk away. So really take the time to learn, because with more knowledge, it's going to be more empowering to you to do better and to really build that reselling business. So this podcast episode, we did want to talk about some of the main reasons why people do fail at reselling, not to discourage you, but to motivate you and have you prepared for reselling. These are realistic expectations things that you should know when you first start selling, and use them as kind of things to motivate you, inspire you to do something different. And really, that's what's going to help you, is by learning. That will help you grow, and that will help you build.
All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Paycheck to Daycheck Reselling Podcast.
Anything we mentioned in this episode will be linked down below in the show notes or description down below.
Be sure to share this episode with anyone you think it will help, and follow us on social media at P2D Podcast.
Thanks again for listening. Keep working towards that day check.